Okay, guys, my name is Christy Thompson, and I am the Sales and Marketing Director here at BIS. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce Philip. Just wanted to say thank y'all for coming out today, and we're going to be discussing how to create and implement an effective disaster recovery plan. Just a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions, you can put them into the chat, and we'll take them throughout the presentation and at the end. Right now, we're going to mute everybody, and then we'll open it up at the end as well, and we'll have this recorded, so we'll send a recording out after the event. So, Philip?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Christy, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. One of the non-renewable resources is time, so we want to really make the most of this. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. And ultimately, this is something that's one of those things that nobody ever wants to really do, but if you ever need it, you really would have wished you would have done it. And really, I think as technology is changing and really the requirements and the compliance of technology is changing, we're seeing more and more people that are requesting this type of information. And it takes a little bit of work and a little bit of thought, but we don't have to make it overly complicated. So I'm going to jump in here and kind of get rolling. Most of you guys on the call, I think, know me. I see a few names I don't know, but I appreciate you coming. Basically, I'm a guy that loves technology, kind of a lifelong learner guy, and been in this industry for about 18 years now. We support pretty much here on the Gulf Coast over 600 clients, so we have really a good level of knowledge coming from doing it every day, day in, day out. I've been immersed in the business, and so we know kind of what's going on. I currently own several of these businesses, and I don't want to go into all that. I'm also something I'm really proud of personally is about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I got my Certified Information System Security Professional certification, which is really a very difficult and quite honestly a prestigious. It's one of the top tier. It is the top tier security professional certifications out there. And also want to go ahead and introduce my guest today, and his name is GARRISON Strickland. He's really a friend of mine. We worked together for several years, and he is really very much into disaster recovery, and he has done basically what I do for a living, day in and day out. And he also is on the company that we represent called Accent, where they do backup disaster recovery business continuity plans. He's also he's been helping small to mid-sized business about the same time I have, and he's been working at Accent for a couple of years, focusing on business continuity and disaster recovery. GARRISON, you there?
I'm here. Philip, thank you so much for having me today. And as you alluded to, I really get excited talking to small businesses and helping them grow and thrive. And the opportunity to talk about backup, like you said, it's not something that is especially fun to talk about, but once you go through it and you have a plan, which is relatively simple, it can really protect you and save you in the long run. Also, Philip, I just want to give you props for having that CISSP cert. That's hard to get, so well done. It's impressive.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's living proof that old dogs can learn new tricks, buddy. But basically, what we're going to go through today is just want to kind of talk about some things that are going on in the industry and things along those lines. But also, I think it's really important that we understand that being down costs a lot of money. It's an easier conversation than I've ever seen today, but it's still, I don't think the magnitude of it is out there in clear mindset of business owners. And I think it's something that I want to kind of take us through a quick kind of a formula here, and I'll share out this calendar, this little spreadsheet here with you guys, but very simple. How long would business at the office be interrupted if critical workstation or server outage occurred? So we're saying 2 hours and 15 minutes. And we're basing this, just off of, maybe a server went down, maybe the internet went out, maybe somebody clicked on something they shouldn't have clicked on. And, how many employees would be affected? We're saying 10 here. And, what's the average hourly wage of an employee? And this is, kind of thinking about, with burden rate, you got to figure in your taxes and all this other kind of stuff. And this is based off of a business that is making $2.5 million a year and only having one location. So I'll recap all of that because I think it's really important, and this is a live calculator that we could play around with. I don't think I'm going to get deep into it because I want to keep it very simple. So we're talking about a business with 10 employees, and each of these employees is making $25 an hour. That's like, with their burden rate, that's with taxes and, what it costs to have an employee. And on an average $2.5 million a year business, having one location. And the results are that 2 hours and 15 minutes of downtime will cost the company $3,267 in just labor cost. And it's just really phenomenal, how much money is calculated in downtime. And I think any business owner here would agree very much so that that's not all that it costs you. It costs you money and intangible items like goodwill to your clients if you weren't available to service them. It costs you in profit. Hopefully you're making a profit. So there's you didn't have the ability to make widgets, therefore you didn't have the revenue that came from making those widgets, and on and on and on and on. And even from a psychological and a perspective of frustration for your staff, it really diminishes output and productivity. So downtime is something that we focus on heavily. And it is one of the big drivers that we're always focused on, is trying to keep the clients up and running, because I recognize this type of number. Now, if you were, say, you had double that kind of, we could play around with some numbers, and I'm not going to do it, but if you had 20 employees and same scenario, you'd be looking at $6,500 an hour. I mean, the cost of that 2-hour downtime. So we're talking real money that gets lost here. So it's something that we want to think about, kind of the Franklin Covey model of thinking of the end in the beginning. Let's think about what downtime costs us. Let's think about that before we really get started into this, and then we'll kind of flow through. All right, so kind of moving forward on this, I want to talk a little bit about just the levels of disaster. And Garrison, you've been doing this a long time. I kind of have a slide here. Talk about the types of disasters that you see on a day-to-day basis.
Well, the reality is that the worst case scenarios, which you have here towards the end, fire, hurricane, water damage, those are not the ones that we see day to day. They certainly do happen, and they're devastating when they do. But it's much more likely that we see downtime that's due to things like corrupt files, deleted files. One that kind of goes in between there, and it's both of those, is ransomware. We're seeing a huge expansion of cryptoviruses, ransomware, where someone installs or deploys something to your network that actually encrypts those files and makes it impossible to get them back. And their objective is to get you to pay them for that. Most recently, I had a small business I was working with, and this is just in the last month, that they actually were targeted by an outside person through social engineering, and then they did that encryption. So a whole new level of nefarious acts that we had not seen before. So those types of things can cause you to be down. I know, Philip, in your example, you had that average of 2 hours and 15 minutes. I think that that's a good average. But as soon as you get into a situation where somebody's, say, taking your entire network over hostage, in that example, then your probably best case is more like 4 to 8 hours, unless you have some type of technology in place that can help you quickly overcome that.
That's right.
Now, another thing that I see is things that are easily overlooked inside the physical environment. Water damage is actually a pretty common one. I can't tell you how many server rooms I've walked into that are have the water pipes running through that room, or maybe a hot water heater or a sprinkler head. And those are the kinds of things that at the outset of a business that oftentimes are overlooked, but having somebody come in and kind of do an evaluation of those kinds of things from a physical perspective, kind of to look at it through different eyes, sometimes it's easy to find where there are potential risks that have been overlooked for a while. Phil, does that give you a good overview? Kind of
Absolutely. And, we kind of class the ransomware under the corrupt file area, and ultimately that is probably the largest threat. Would you agree? Probably to the average business is somebody basically doing a phishing email attack, or somebody clicking on something, encrypting the file. That's pretty much probably Absolutely. The largest. Yeah,
that is the largest, and that goes into an entire deeper conversation around the stack of security you have around the network, including but not limited to the type of backup that you're using. But like I said, that event that we witnessed a couple of weeks ago was like something we had never seen. To have someone actually pinpoint a company to do that encryption. So that's a huge risk right now because it's hard to protect against.
Exactly. So, well, we'll keep moving. I want to talk just a minute about really the three, what I would call the most popular types of backup today, or that are out there. At least three of them that are out there. I wouldn't say necessarily most popular on this first one, which I'll just speak to it quickly, and I'll let you add because I want to get past it. Tape backup, it's the old tape. You can see the guy sliding in the tape in the front of the server, and I call it a non-starter. It's about a 30% fail rate on those, and there's a lot of reasons why they fail. Some of it is people just don't replace the tapes, and those tapes are kind of like an old cassette tape, and you know how over time you keep playing your favorite song on that cassette tape, the sound quality goes down. Well, it's a lot the same way with these types of tapes. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, or if we want to go ahead and move right on into the file and folder.
I would just say just quickly that one of the things that's important to keep in mind when you think about the different types of backup is how long does it take for that backup to process and run. So in most cases, if you're using tape, you're only going to have, at best case, one backup per day because how long it takes it to back up your entire network, which means that if you did have some type of failure or outage, that your best case for going back is to lose an entire day's worth of work. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as you think about different types of backups. How much work would you actually have to re-enter just because you had to fall back to your backup?
And we saw that, I don't know, I can't remember, but it was about about $1,200 an hour on a $2.5 million company in just labor cost, $1,200 an hour with 10 employees. So if you had to enter 8 hours, you're looking at, that's a 10 grand investment that you just made. So it really puts the type of backup budget, in my view, it puts your budget into the proper perspective, and that's one of the goals we want to accomplish today, is to make sure people are thinking as if a disaster happened. I'll add one thing to that too, is that particular tape drive, where they're sticking that tape in this case, you have to mount it in a new piece of hardware if your hardware fails. And that was always a challenge back whenever we did that a lot. Oh gosh, we don't have the proper adapter to get that old tape drive put into the new server, and it would cause a whole another series of problems. So I think that's important. But again, I would just pretty much say if you're using tape backup, we need to talk immediately. This other slide, I want to kind of set it up, Garrison, for you. And this is, to your point, this is where we would call what we might call a cloud-based backup, where we're backing up files and folders. Let's just go to something simple. Let's say we're running a company and we have, of course, a lot of files. Think about it in marketing. You got your marketing department has files. You've got your accounting department has reports that they save. You have your, say, QuickBooks or Peachtree or Sage or whatever, just a simple company, and they have databases. And let's say that we have all of that data, and let's say that we're getting a successful backup. And again, most of the time these types of backup only run once a day at night, so there is a risk of data that you would not be backed up if a catastrophe or some type of event happened during the day. But what I would like to kind of focus on is more of, in order to restore that data, you're looking at the the data being at the top of the pyramid, and that's the thing that's the value. I always say in these scenarios, you're out of work, but you're not out of business, because to go back to work, you would have to replace hardware. You'd have to re-download all of your software, find the disk, find the licensing. Then you would have to configure it all. I got to set up my scan folders. I got to set up my printers. I got to set up all the users and put them in the system. And then I restore my data and I go back to work. And if it's in the case of a server, we're probably looking at, I don't know, days, 2 to 4 days worth of downtime, which is very costly. And some companies, I guess they'd be forced to. Hopefully they have good insurance, but it could be very, very, very painful. What's your thoughts on like a cloud-based or a file and folder backup, Garrison?
Well, I think that's exactly right. Is that when you start to look at the costs, the true cost of downtime, and you look back to that calculator that you showed, that it's the amount of time that your people lose, that your team loses, and that's also the amount of time that it takes to invest in that technology person that comes in to fix that. So having the data is better than not having the data, but having to go in and do that reinstall and all of the potential hiccups and issues that come with that, it really puts the file and folder type backup into I think a special niche where there are places for it, but when it comes to your most critical data, whether you're to run your business from day to day, that's when it's really not ideal, unless you're in a situation where you can be down for 3 or 4 days. Certainly there are some businesses that say, hey, we can operate without our XYZ software for 3 days.
That's right. But one other thing that I've talked to people, they're like, yeah, that'd be fine as long as it's not Thursday, because we got to get payroll out. Well, the reality of life is that if you're going to have a failure and you can't be out on Thursday for payroll, that's the day that you're going to have that failure. So you have to think worst case scenario.
Yes, and the other thing, and this kind of illustrates one of the differences between the tape backup and when you move into a more sophisticated backup like file and folder, because it certainly is more sophisticated than backup. When you rely on a tape or even a hard drive that someone has to trade out every day, then now you're relying on a person to do that job. And usually you would have one person inside your business that would do that. And my motto for years and years has been, as soon as you have to rely on a person to make sure your backup triggers and initiates and finishes, then you have a failure point much greater than the hardware itself, because they may be sick, they may forget. And over and over again, I see both of those scenarios where the person that was supposed to take care of that just forgot to do it, or they weren't there. And so when you rely on a person to do that activity, where it's a plug in a hard drive or put in a tape, there's a tremendous risk to that, because people are people, and we forget things.
That's right. And then kind of the third, kind of a popular, and this is of late getting more popular, would be an image-based system, and it's going to have some advantages to it. And walk us through this little graphic here, Garrison, and help us to kind of think through a disaster, and if you would frame it in that way and talk about
Sure.
the benefits.
Sure. This slide at first glance may seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's really relatively simple. If you look at the on the far left, you've got the three pillars there that represent Exchange, SQL, and your web server. That's basically your internal server. So any server that you have that's running your applications or storing your files, anything like that. And the new image-based backup or newer way of backing up, what it does is it relies on an appliance, so another piece of hardware that would go alongside your server. And every 15 minutes, it looks at your primary, what we would call production server, and it backs that up to the appliance. So every 15 minutes, it's getting an exact copy of that data. So now that that speaks to what we talked about a minute ago. How long would it take to re-enter the data if there was a failure? Well, you're getting a full backup every 15 minutes. Usually that's very, there'll be a minimal amount of information that's been entered in that time. Now, once it's on that appliance, so that device that gets put in, that here is, the BIS data guard. There's some really special things that we can do with an image-based backup. And one of the most important ones, and this speaks to the downtime that we were talking about, is that you can actually turn those servers on inside of the appliance. So let's imagine a situation where you've got your Exchange server, which runs all of your mail at your site, and something happens to it in the middle of the day. Hard drive fails, there's some kind of physical issue with the motherboard, the power supply, and it's no longer operating. What the image-based appliance lets us do is say, okay, well, it's not operating, so now we're going to connect in to that data guard box, that appliance, and we're going to turn that server on temporarily in a virtualized environment. And as soon as we turn that on, it's as if that server is back in place. And that takes a very short amount of time. I would expect from the time that happened, Philip, I don't know what y'all's time is, but if somebody called you, that would be a critical situation. You would probably have them back up and running within a couple of hours, if that long.
Yeah, usually in that type of backup, what's really neat about it, is that we can log in remotely and fire that backup server up, that data guard server up, and literally in about the time it takes it to boot, 15, 20 minutes, that server is exactly the way it was, just shortly before, based on the last backup that it took. So, I mean, it's really fast. And, talking about like crypto, where, ransomware, where the files, say, got all encrypted, we can actually restore that image and run off of that while the other box is being repaired. So, I mean, it really does. It's a game changer. I'm so thankful for these types of backups because they really protect us as a service provider. We look like a hero. Something tragic happens, and the client's like, oh, they don't even realize how tragic it really was because we have them up and running.
Right. It is almost. It's not magic, but it's almost like magic. When this was released, and all of a sudden we could start to get people back up and running so quickly, it was just amazing from the technology side of this. And then not only is it backing that up there locally, so that you have this on this appliance, it's sending it off-site, so that if there was a more catastrophic event, fire or flood that destroyed the entire site, it sends that data off-site into the cloud, where it can also be virtualized and turned on in a very short period. And so even though you no longer had a physical building, it's possible that your people could go home or to Panera or Starbucks or the library or wherever they have internet connection and connect in and continue to do some of their work. So it really gives a tremendous amount of flexibility. And for Philip, I know it gives you guys a security net, and it allows you to have the time to repair, say, that failed Exchange server in that scenario the right way. Instead of getting the wrong parts and just trying to get them fast, it lets you take a step back and slow down to get more done.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said, but in the case of time, I mean, there's it really is a whole nother level. And in the event that you needed that image, they can next day air that image from the redundant storage site, send the image back down so that you could put it back on a new server. And so it really does, it cuts down, I mean, the time in so many fashions, even from a catastrophic type event. So let's jump on in here and let's talk about, a disaster recovery plan. And I want to go over a couple of terms straight off the bat. And we've kind of touched on them a little bit, and this will be the most technical stuff that we're probably going to talk about today. But let's talk about a recovery point objective. That sounds like something that probably most people don't deal with. What's that mean, Garrison?
Well, and this is actually what I was talking about a little bit earlier. The recovery point objective is to what point do you need to verify or make sure you can back up or restore data from? So if your backups, for instance, ran once every day at 6 p.m. at night, then if you had a failure at 5 p.m. the next day, you would have almost 24 hours lost. And for some businesses, that's okay. As you shorten that time, and we just saw in the last slide about the image-based backup, you can get that down to a 15-minute period, which is very comfortable for most businesses. And we see most of our the clients we work with they're going to be between the 15-minute and the 1 hour. Now, one of the reasons this is important is because you can take this all the way up to instantaneous. And as you do that, and as so often the case, that last 1% maybe or whatever it is, between the 15-minute backup and the immediate backup, as you get closer and closer to I can't lose a second of data, it gets tremendously more expensive.
Oh yeah.
And way more expensive. And so most businesses are comfortable with that 15-minute to 1 hour. But that's the recovery point objective. So when you think about the cost of that downtime, if you're in a business where being down for even 15 minutes is going to cost you millions of dollars, then you certainly want to start to look at something that would be faster for recovery. When you're looking in the thousands of dollars or even tens of thousands of dollars, then you're more in that 15-minute to 1 hour range in most cases, because the cost doesn't outweigh the benefit.
All right. And the next term is recovery time objective. And we kind of already touched on that, but we're going to fill in the gaps for you on this. Explain recovery time objective.
All right, so the recovery time objective, like Philip said, we've really been speaking around, but that's how long does it actually take us to get you back up and running? So the RPO, you can imagine that as the recovery point objective. That's right up to the event, the incident, and the RTO, the recovery time objective, is from the time of the incident until you're back up and running. Now, there are two phases of this when you think about like an image-based backup, because you can have an interim RTO. So when you virtualize on that appliance, like Philip was saying, if you had that BIS appliance in there, then you have a failure and you call them, and this is true, across the board with any image base, pretty much. You call them, and then they're able to remote in and have you back up and running within minutes. So we're talking instead of that 2 hour and 15-minute average we were using, or a 4 or 6 hour outage if you had a hardware failure, you're talking about minutes. So certainly less than an hour, and that's not just the amount of time it takes to get back up and going. That's the amount of time it takes to realize there's a problem, call your IT provider, and they remote in and get you back up and going. So that's, as you talk about things that get away from the image-based, and the file folder or the tape backup, that period of time gets much longer to actually get you back up and running.
That's right. And the goal for us today, what I want our listeners to hear is how long, how much data can I afford to lose? And, can I afford to lose a day's worth of data? And, one of the things I learned in my CISSP training was that as long as senior management signs off on the risk, then it's okay because they are made aware of the risk. They have calculated the risk in their grand formula of business, and they say, okay, I'm okay with 8 hours, 4 hours, whatever it is. But, you really need, before you're broken, to go through the process of how long can I be without my data? Can I afford, and I'll just briefly touch on this, like a typical, like say something really bad happens to a server and say it's out of warranty, you can't get parts for it anymore, you're going to buy a new server. Well, here's two scenarios. One scenario is we usually, this is not a guarantee, but we usually have what we call a loaner or a swing server. We're going to come in, we're going to rebuild your network with our hair on fire, and it's going to be stressful. Everybody's going to be stressed out on my side and the client side, and we're going to get them back going maybe in, a day, maybe a day and a half, 2 days. Well, then when a new server comes in, I got to redo all of that. Or another scenario is you go out to an outlet like Dell Outlet, you order a server, you can't buy exactly what you want because they don't have it in the outlet, so you wind up having to buy more server than you need. If you get the order in before about 1 in the afternoon, you can get it the next day. Well, if not, you got to wait a whole nother day. So we're burning a day or two right there. Then in that time we're rounding up software, and then we got to physically get the server in to install it and configure it to the network. That's a day. And then we're down 2 to 4 days in those scenarios, and that's your recovery time objective. And you really, as a business owner, need to do the math to say, I can tolerate that much. And if you can't, then you need to have a discussion about what it looks like not to have that. And another portion of what needs to happen for this disaster recovery plan is defined critical business processes and applications. And Garrison, if you'll roll on the explanation for that, please.
Sure. When you think about the disaster recovery plan, it really is a lot broader than just the hardware that we've been talking about. And so that's yep. Part of this broader conversation we're getting into is it's really important before the issue occurs, and then to refresh it, I'd say at least quarterly. What are the most critical business processes that you need to address should there be some type of catastrophic event? And then at what level of event are we even going to be looking at? It's one thing if you had just a server failure. It's another thing if you had a flood. So what do you want to need to understand what those processes are, and then assign someone to be basically the manager of those processes in the event that there is some kind of disaster. And the same thing with the applications, because so often we do this work inside the world technology, but it's also important to have some understanding about what would you have to do if that technology went away for a short period. And by defining this and then assigning responsibility, someone to be responsible for it, it helps you understand what your options are and how to move forward in the event of a disaster.
Yeah, that's right. And then, next is basically assigning roles to who's going to be responsible for what. I think that's another part of the disaster recovery planning is to, you're going to probably want to break things down within the organization as to, you're going to be responsible for this aspect, and someone else may be responsible for, finding an offsite location. Maybe it's, somebody in your, logistics or service delivery is going to be more gifted or more qualified, or maybe just simply have the more time to find the hot site that you're going to go to, or, again, just assigning who's going to do what. Talk to me a little bit about what you've seen in those areas.
Well, hopefully no one on the call has ever been part of a catastrophic disaster. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and back in 2010 we had the flood here, and it really gave me a lot of real world exposure and direct exposure to small businesses that were at all different levels of preparedness. Thankfully, the clients we worked with were, in the most case, okay, but we had people that we never worked with before that needed help, and so we did everything we could. And we found that the companies that were most successful in getting back up on their feet were the ones that had gone through these steps. They outlined the needs of their business to operate, and then they were very clear in defining who was going to take that and own it during this period. And so it gave us as a technology company a really clear understanding of who we needed to talk to and when. They were able to prioritize very clearly what it was that they needed to accomplish. And Philip, I don't know, I may be jumping ahead here, but we even had companies during that period that had created relationships with competitors that were friendly, and we had some of them move in together, and that was their hot site, which to me was just an amazing show of our community. But those types of things that you certainly might not think about as being options or ever needed, in situations like this, they all of a sudden become options. And having someone that had that role of we've got to find out where we're going to go or we can't operate is critical. It's critical.
Yeah.
To
Garrison, John Matazza, with
Sure.
S&T Squared out of Joplin, Missouri. And as a matter of fact, Accent had a big role in that that horrible tornado that devastated, absolutely devastated their community. Do you know all the details to that event?
I don't know all the details, but I do know that it was there were a tremendous number of businesses he supported, and his own business was actually physically completely destroyed.
Yes, and I know because John's been in my peer group for a while,
Yeah.
and he shared with us just really, he had image-based backups he specialized in medical, and he had image-based backups for a lot of his clients, and literally, it's a success story for Accent, and it shows the heart of the company. Those guys stayed up. They made servers, and John called and said, hey, I don't even know how I'm going to pay you for all the services, to get these new pieces of hardware shipped and all that, but we need them. And servers started just showing up, and he was picking them up at a gas station with a UPS guy to get these medical practices back up and going. So it really was a success story. If somebody, I think there's some documentation on the whole event, but it was really big. And again, I think it's important that you kind of jump ahead to the to the communication plan of who communicates what to whom. That needs to be outlined. Assign those roles of who is who is the leader for what areas of the recovery and things like that, even if it be small, and we can work through some of that. But the communication plan is essential, where most plans ultimately fail because nobody knows. It's not communicated, the cascading throughout an organization, depending upon how big it is, as to what is really happening. There needs to be a pecking order. On 101 Dalmatians, they had the barking chain. We would want to set something up a little better than that. So what's your thoughts on communication plans?
Well, there's the basic and what seems obvious things like having a full list of all employees, all vendors, and your account information and contact information for those vendors. I would go so far as to organizing this entire plan into a physical book, not just a digital book, because we may be talking about a situation where you don't have access to the digital version. So by having that and keeping, you know, 2 copies of it, one on site and one off site, that it helps make sure that you've got what you need when you need it. But then also all the way to having, you know, a place where your employees can group together, congregate, and take care of them, because they're going to need, in situations like this, they need a tremendous amount of support, and you need them for your business as well. And so there's a lot of communication that goes on around that, an organization that needs to happen.
Yeah. Another major component of it is, you know, documented network, you know, with pictures, actually having, you know, pictures. And I don't know where I heard this, but I believe it to be true. And I think I even heard a statistic with it. But basically, the guy, and he was an insurance guy, and he said that you don't remember all of the things that you have. And sometimes 2 and 3 years later, which of course you can't go back and go to the well, if you will, to the insurance company and say, hey, I just remembered I needed that. So he would actually video and take pictures, is what they recommended, is to take videos and pictures of your, you know, your office, your rooms, your assets, basically, so that you would have them. Any input on that you'd want to add?
No, I think that's pretty straightforward. It is really important to have that, and this rolls right into, I think, the next thing you're going to talk about is, you know, there are things that you can take pictures of, but like inventory of assets, there's a whole host of technology pieces, especially, that are not so. You may not need to go around and take a picture of all those, but there are programs that can be run that let you gather that inventory of assets and easily and clearly hand that over, say, to an insurance company and to a technology company, should they come in and need to be helping you.
Yeah, that's right. Now, of course, we're talking about, you know, we talked a lot about, we kind of started talking up backups, because quite frankly, especially in small to mid-sized markets that, you know, that you and I work in, a lot of times they think disaster recovery is backup, and really it's just a component of a good disaster recovery plan. So, and I think we've talked about backups and possibly even a backup work site. The cool thing about the world today is that, you know, you can hotspot your phone and get some pretty good internet if you got your information set up there. You know, so what's your thoughts on backup worksite? I know you mentioned, you know, possibly even sharing offices. You know, think outside the box, get creative.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in a suite with a bunch of other people, maybe you make a deal with another suite across the city, or in another city that's in some type of group with you or something.
Absolutely, and I think that there's a lot more opportunity to do that than sometimes people think. But because when you get in these situations, everybody, for the most part, does want to reach out and help their community. And I think you started to touch on something, Philip, that, you know, we're talking about backup, but really what we're talking about, and I think the lens to look at this entire conversation through is business continuity.
Yeah.
What steps can we take, not just from a technology perspective, but from a broad, I'm going to look at my entire business. What steps do I need to take in order to stay functioning and in business, so that we can continue to you know, bring in revenue and provide the service that we've promised, and provide the paychecks to your employees. And when you start to look at it through that lens, then it starts to clarify, in my mind at least, the steps you need to take in order to you know, give everybody confidence about that. It actually becomes you know, I don't know what your job market is down there, but in Nashville it's pretty tight right now. It's hard to get people, and when you can talk to them about this kind of planning, then it gives them a confidence in you as a company that is actually a selling point. So.
Yeah, I'd agree 1,000% on the things that, you know, if you present yourself, and again, you're just practicing due diligence, or doing due diligence and practicing due care, and it sends a message to everyone, your clients, to your staff, to your spouse. I mean, really, all ships rise with the tide in those areas. The type of work here that's often not done, and is work that really does have a lot more benefit than what you would think of as being on the top of the surface. Another thing to take into consideration whenever you're developing your disaster recovery plan is compliance. What is the standard by which you're held? I've sat on some cases, and if it's not written, like some people are like, I don't really have any big time compliance or regulations or standards that I have to live by. Well, what you have to live by is case law to a large degree. If it's basically would a surprisingly, like say accountants, they're actually not held to a lot of compliance. There's a lot of things they have to do, but from a security standpoint of protection of data and all that kind of stuff, there's really not something that says, like in HIPAA, one of the components of the Health Insurance and Portability Accountability Act was that you were able to provide services to your patients. That's one of the deals that you're living up to. But from an accounting perspective, you let some accountants go down on, for the last week of April, middle April, April 15th and previous, they're going to hurt a lot of people. And if somebody were to sue or whatever, I haven't been on that type of case, but I'm just thinking, and they said, well, somebody may come in and take a look at what you were doing, and would that meet the standard by which other people in your industry are living up to? So I don't know if you want to add anything kind of to the compliance requirements, but that's something that definitely has to be cooked into the sauce of a good service delivery. A good disaster recovery plan.
Absolutely, and that goes right along with that physical documentation that I was talking about, which may seem antiquated, but to have something that outlines the policies and procedures you're going to go through to continue to meet the compliance, or even just the standards you've set for yourself. If you're moving around from one place to another, and say you're bound by the HIPAA regulations, then there are some things you've got to think about transferring any data like that off-site in a way that you're not used to. And you got to be careful around that and make sure you've got good documentation about how it might change the processes that you're going to follow.
Yeah, that's right. So you really want to, again, that's just another layer. So really, the question becomes, how do you implement the plan? I hope we've made the case that everybody on the call should have this plan in place. So really, how do you implement that plan is essential, and it gets down to the question of, what should I do next? And there's oftentimes the greatest journeys are started with the first steps, and I always like to, this is like in a lot of our presentations, because you don't want to be whatever, here's something, no, you got to do it and not get it on the calendar to make it happen. So one thing that we're doing that is really is, I think, really a good thing for our communities and our clients and even potential clients, is we want to give away a free disaster recovery planning session. Now, I want to make sure that I clarify this, because it's really not where we're going to come in and basically do it all for you, but we'll provide a soup starter document that really has the nuts and bolts of all the things that we've discussed. And we'll discuss, what it looks like, answer questions and be there for people. I think that's one of the things that we really do a lot of stuff for the community, because, Garrison, you live in Nashville, and, I spend a lot of time in Nashville. Once a quarter, I go to Nashville. And if you were to look at the Nashville market compared to our market, we're really, we're not as advanced from a technological standpoint. the guys in my peer group harass me. They think we're whatever down here. So, and I mean, we are a little further behind, I think, from a technology standpoint here on the coast. They call it the Redneck Riviera. And we want to do our part. I mean, sincerely, I want to do my part in trying to help our businesses, be in a better position, be there. And I'll also add to that, part of a good plan, there's really three pillars to a good plan. One is the governance, which is documentation. This being one of the essential pieces of documentation, so that if you ever did had to, basically defend yourself on decisions and things that you did, this would be a nice piece of paper to be able to put forth to say, yeah, something bad happened, but we planned for this, we thought about this, again, we've done our due diligence, we're practicing due care. And then the second part is the physical aspects that we discussed earlier. Don't have water pipes in your server room. That's not best. And then also the third part would be, of course, the overall plan itself and the technology side of things. And that's kind of what I'll help people with on this free disaster recovery session, is to kind of frame it up and put them in a position to be successful. And that's really for everybody who is on this call. The only thing that I ask is that, we'll actually stretch this out a little bit. What's the date? That's kind of tight. If you'll get with me before February 15th, I don't want to keep this kind of thing open, because it requires some bandwidth. And I'm personally the one that will do this, and my bandwidth is sometimes limited. But really, I want to give back. I want to do the right thing for our community. So if you'll email the events at Ask BIS and just say, hey, I want to get on the schedule to come out and talk about that disaster recovery plan, I'll be happy to follow up with you. So, Christy, what do we have in way of questions? I would like to give everybody the opportunity to ask any questions they might have.
Yeah, we had a few questions come in. The first one is, what can you do about phones going down from a disaster?
All right, couple things you can do, and one of the really neat things is that if you're using the newer type of what we'll call voice over IP, and I won't go into a long explanation. I would suspect most people know what voice over IP phones are. Basically, where the internet is your provider, you can physically pick up that phone and take it somewhere else and plug it in. And, of course, they got to have good bandwidth there and good internet, but you could work it that way. And another thing that's neat about voice over IP is that you can actually log into where those phone numbers are, and you can just quickly forward them to a cell phone. So whereas, the old way of kind of having that copper line and the power went out, it still worked. I think that really you expand your horizons by going to voice over IP. And that you can take the phone to another physical, and it rings exactly the way it would at your office. If you're in a call group and you're taking live calls, well, you just go plug that in at your house, and you can continue to take those live calls just like you're at the office. Or if something really bad happens, you can just have it forwarded to your cell phone. And this can happen literally in minutes. It means basically logging into a web portal and pulling a drop down and saying forward calls to this number, and you put in a cell number and click OK, and immediately those calls are now ringing that cell phone.
And certainly that would be part of that disaster recovery planning, is logging what kind of phone system do you have, and where would those numbers need to roll over to in the event that the worst case scenario happened. That way your technology provider, technology partner could already have that in hand and know what to do.
Yeah, thank you very much, Garrison. That's a good point about, that needs to be in the plan. If the internet goes down here, or if the power is going to be out, hell, right down the road, the bank, and this has been probably, I don't know, I'm bad about time, but they had a major transformer blow up on top of the bank right down the street, and the bank was down literally for several days while they had to order in parts. And that'd have been nice to have in the plan where they say, yeah, great, well, we'll take our phones and go sign up to, there's other branches around. We'll take our calls and we'll just go plug in down here in the conference room down at the other bank. So that'd be smart. What else you got, Christy?
Yeah. Who would you suggest to be on the disaster recovery team?
Garrison, you take a crack and I'll listen to what you say and I'll see if I have anything to add.
Well, Phillip Long first. I'm just kidding, Phillip.
Yeah.
So the people that need to be on that are the same kind of people in your organization today that, some of these roles, as we talk about roles, they're natural, and they move right over to this disaster recovery plan. So you're going to need whoever's in charge of your overall operations of the business. You're going to need someone who has access to things like AR, AP that can help with that. Somebody that's over payroll, a person to lead that. Oftentimes that would be the CEO or the president or maybe the COO. And then you also are going to want to incorporate a leader for each basically division or group within the organization to head up, at least in the way that I see it, that chain of communication. And so a lot of times that's going to actually pretty closely mirror your internal organizational chart, but you're going to have some new and different responsibilities for each of those people that they don't usually take on.
I like that. I do. I think, for us in particular, my partner, Kevin, he's, the heavy IT guy. He's going to be on it for sure. Lori, the accounting person, we got to have money. We got to pay our bills. We got to, a lot of things like that. We got to have somebody. Christy would be on it for communication to clients, so that and the cool thing is, like, even communication to clients, you may want to grab a like a MailChimp, and it's free, like you don't do a lot with email blasting. You may want to grab a list of all your clients and have them out there laying in MailChimp, and have the template already made or have it close to being made. So basically you go in and modify with the details of what's going to happen and send it out. So it'll involve pretty much probably all your department heads. And then you got to have somebody who's communicating with the entire group, the entire staff, and so again, it's really not that hard, because and I always think of it, I do a very common sense approach. All right, we have a power outage. What are you going to do? Well, up to 4 hours, we're not going to do anything, or maybe maybe that brings up something, we're going to put a generator in. I don't know, I mean, again, you just have to kind of think through real life scenarios to develop your plan. And it doesn't have to be exotic or fancy. It just really needs to be documented and communicated.
That kind of answered the next question, which is, how would you create a communication plan?
Yeah. I think that, again, that would answer the question to a large degree, is just thinking through, the components of your business. You have internal staffing that you're going to need to communicate with. Maybe some people don't even need to come in, or maybe some people need to be sent home because, there's nothing that they can do. Your clients being another one, your vendors, or maybe your banker or your insurance person. You need to, kind of get a short list of things. I am personally right now going through my insurance and going through all of the types of coverages, and the way that I'm doing it is going through scenarios that I've heard or seen of, and making sure that I'm protected. Real life scenarios. Hey, if this happens, basically how much I got to come up out of pocket. Do I have documentation saying I've trained all my staff, saying that they know not to do X, Y, or Z? Again, it goes back to the documents, what I call governance. It goes back to the physical aspect. Are we handling this data? Are we there, and then it goes back to the technical of that, and then all that has to be communicated out. All that has to be communicated well within your team. But an org chart would be a great little document to start with, I would say.
Perfect. Well, that's all the questions we have for today.
Well, cool. Well, I want to, again, this was the non-renewable resource of time, and it's been given to us, and I hope it was beneficial. We are always looking for your feedback on things that you guys are concerned about or would like to learn about. And I'd also like to know from a technical standpoint, we always, one of the things we believe in is no geek speak. And I want to make sure that we've, done what we say. I mean, was this beneficial to you? Email us, let us know topics that you want to do. I, of course, want to thank Garrison for taking time out of his day and giving us his insight. They're really a great partner for us, and I just want to say thank you, Garrison.
You're so welcome. I really appreciate you inviting me to be a part of it, and I'm glad to do it anytime.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it's back to it's 2:01. It's back to the grind. So if we can help y'all, please don't hesitate to reach out. We are going to spin this up into a video, and we'll be sharing that out with everyone who attended the meeting. So share that with folks that you think need it. We greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful afternoon, and thank you, Christy, too, for all your work in making these things happen.
Absolutely. Bye, guys.